I want to bring in Bloomberg contributing editor Paul Kudrowski, also a former equity analyst and currently an early-stage venture investor. He joins me now from San Diego. Paul, I want to start with China first. You know, obviously we all know this would be a huge deal if Apple finally nails China Mobile. Would a deal like this seal Apple's fate in China?
I don't know if anything seals its fate, but I mean, if it hadn't done, let's put it the other way around, if it didn't do something that involved, you know, some sort of distribution arrangement with China Mobile, it was very difficult to be optimistic about sort of Apple's long-run prospects in China, because it was just such a massive hole in their distribution, given the numbers for China Mobile versus the other two major carriers. You know, you kind of had to have them as a distributor, and as a result, you know, Apple, I think, was looking for the right sort of product entree, and the much-rumored Apple, the 5C product, this sort of lower-end, less expensive product, probably provides them finally with a, you know, the right product entree. And I'm assuming China Mobile has likely eaten some of its concerns with respect to volume guarantees, which had been the other sticking point apparently on it from a carrier front. And so you put those two pieces together, and you got yourself a deal.
So what do you think is Apple's fate in China then, given that Apple is really a luxury brand, and yet we're expecting to release a cheaper phone as well?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, this has been kind of a, you know, a mistaken notion in the first place, that the only thing that would drive Apple's success, specifically with China Mobile, given its dominance in the sort of rural areas, was a cheaper product. And I think that underestimates the Chinese appetite for luxury products. And we've seen this across a host of other products from Prada on outward, where there is an incredible appetite in a rapidly sort of urbanizing and rapidly more wealthy China for what are perceived as kind of halo products, products that aren't just sort of this sort of commoditized, generic stuff that they'd seen historically or knockoffs, but products that were sort of had this sort of luxury brand cachet. And as we all know, I mean, Apple's long had that sort of halo reputation worldwide. It's one of the reasons why you pay a 30% and 40% premium for Apple laptops over laptops that are comparable size and, you know, battery from other manufacturers. And so the same, I think, is going to apply for Apple in China on the phone front. They may not get 30% and 40% premiums, but there's no question that the Chinese consumers have the same, you know, appetite for luxury purchasing in phone products that they do in other categories. It was silly for people to think otherwise, and it was a bit baffling, I think.
And yet, Paul, in terms of market share, Apple is slipping in the ranks in China. You know, we're going to be speaking with Xiaomi CEO Lei Jun a little bit later in this show. You know, Xiaomi is now above Apple when you look at the smartphone rankings. This is a company that sells cheap phones that just started 3 years ago.
I think that's true, but I think this is kind of a, you know, a blip along the way. There's no doubt that Apple or that China is going to move just as quickly to smartphones as the rest of the world has. And one of the big pieces missing was having distribution outside of the major urban areas. I mean, Apple had done fairly well in Beijing and Shanghai, but really poorly outside of those two major urban centers, you know, to sort of grossly oversimplify. But I mean, so this changes all of that. So all of a sudden you have the distribution, and I think the numbers are going to change dramatically afterwards. Will they suddenly, you can go racing past everyone else in the Chinese market? No, they're not racing past everyone else in the North American market either, but they'll be back to some sort of comparability with respect to their numbers elsewhere in the world.
Okay, so looking at this potential China Mobile deal, along with a potential NTT Docomo deal, put this into context for us. Obviously, Apple and Samsung are neck and neck worldwide. What happens if Apple does finally nail both of these deals?
Oh, I think people are going to surprise people in China. You know, they're also looking at, I think, tripling the number of stores over the next year or so, if I remember the numbers correctly. You know, Apple's really recognized not only that it is a pretty open marketplace from the standpoint of this, you know, the suburban, or I suppose the rural-urban shift, but it's also a really open marketplace in terms of this luxury halo effect that Samsung just does not get. So this is an attribute that Apple brings to the marketplace that Samsung doesn't. There's no notion that Samsung is some kind of halo luxury brand, and Apple is. So it's an aspirational product, to use the sort of marketer's term, and that's going to stand it in really good stead over the next couple of years. And I think you'll see it become, if not the dominant brand, there, #2 in that marketplace.